you're joining us on this Tele-town hall, focusing on the $3 trillion bailout that you've probably heard Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker in the House, talking about. What a disaster for our country. What a disaster for the budget. And frankly, it doesn't help the very people that we would want to be helping. Instead, it rewards years of irresponsible spending by states that are just out of control. So at Americans for Prosperity, we're saying no more. So we're opposing this. We have an effort called rejectbailouts.com, rejectbailouts.com. We hope you'll join that. You're part of our Tele-town hall. You're going to be hearing from Senator Marsha Blackburn in just a moment. I'd like to introduce our state director at Americans for Prosperity from the great state of Tennessee. As you probably know, we have permanent full-time staff working with literally hundreds of thousands of Americans in 35 states across this country with Americans for Prosperity. Tori Venable is our Tennessee state director. We're so glad to have her on tonight. Tori, take it away.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks, y'all, for joining us tonight. Here in Rocky Top, we partner with folks from the Tri-Cities to Memphis, Nashville, Knoxville, and everywhere in between to fight for lower taxes and less government spending. I'm so honored to introduce our policy champion for fiscal responsibility, longtime grassroots leader, and conservative senator from the great state of Tennessee, Marsha Blackburn. Senator Blackburn, what was your first thought when you heard that Speaker Pelosi's bailout bill for recklessly spending states was over $3 trillion?
Oh, Tori, I have to tell you that the first thing I did was to turn to my staff and I said, this has to be a mistake. This is ridiculous. $3 trillion after we have just borrowed $4.5 trillion and we're at $25 trillion in debt. My first thought was this had to be something that was a mistake. But we have to remember that Rahm Emanuel, when he was chief of staff, he said their guideline was never let a crisis go to waste. And as he ran the Obama White House, and they created a crisis and then created a response to a crisis, they tried to push that liberal agenda a little bit further every single time. Now, one of the things that we have to keep in mind with this COVID-19 crisis, what you saw was the CARES Act, which basically was a rescue bill. It was there to bridge our economy and people to the point that we could have a restart and get our economy going. It was to make sure that we could prop the economy up so that we didn't have sectors of the economy fall through. But what we know was now we have to be certain that that bill is properly implemented with the SBA's 7A loan program, with the money that was put in to go to education and the money that was put to stand up our hospitals, the 13-3 program that is there for larger businesses. We have to have oversight of that because businesses have not magically recovered. And we have to have a very methodical, organized process, putting that focus on recovery. We had the rescue, our economy is in restart, and then our next step is going to be recovery. But through all of this, bear in mind, Pelosi didn't want to do that. What she wanted to do was just go crank up the printing presses and print more money and run up the debt and keep the country in lockdown.
Yeah. But, ladies and gentlemen, you're on live with Senator Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee. My name is Tim Phillips at Americans for Prosperity. Thank you for joining us. You were just listening to the senator talk about this $3 trillion Pelosi bailout. and why it's a bad idea. If you'd like to ask some questions, just press *3 on your phone. *3, it's toll free. There's no charge to you. Our operators will get with you and we'll put you in the queue. That's *3. And if you have not made your voice heard to your 2 senators and to your House member, now's your chance. Go to rejectbailouts.com, and make your voice heard right now. Your senators need to hear from you. Senator Blackburn, a second question for you. You mentioned the impact of this $3 trillion bill on the budget deficit. And that's a term we hear about. I know when you were in the House, you were genuinely someone who fought to rein in government overspending. But why does the deficit matter, and why does that long-term debt matter for our economy and for our nation? That's something we hear about. I'm not sure that we always understand why it matters.
Well, you're exactly right. And Tim, I have to tell you, first of all, I want to say thank you so much to you and AFP and the ground troops, as I call them, who do such a great job pushing for fiscal accountability and a good, strong framework, not only at the federal, but at our state level, and making certain that we are controlling that annual deficit and our long-term debt is vitally important. Like I just mentioned, that our debt has now gone to $25 trillion through this. The Phase 3 bill was the $2.2 trillion. We went to the debt market and borrowed $4.5 trillion, and you've got Pelosi wanting to put another $3 trillion on top of our children and grandchildren. When people say, well, but, we have to do this, I look at it another way. I've got 2 grandsons, and I always think, how is this fair to them? They are yet to earn a paycheck. And how is it fair to them as they look back through history to say, oh, you know what, we are paying for the COVID-19 crisis. And so in essence, you're asking these children to pay for programs that they will never use with money that they have never earned and are yet to earn. So we are placing this on them. Now, sometimes people will say, oh my goodness, but interest rates are low, but at some time that is going to go up. So when you look at this annual deficit, you have to think about the long-term debt, and you have to think about what that is going to do to that debt. So I look at it and say there are 3 trillion reasons for me to oppose this bill, and the bill that Nancy Pelosi brought forward is never going to see the light of day in the U.S. Senate. And I found it very interesting, too, that all of this adding to the deficit with her $3 trillion bill, the House is not even in session. So Pelosi has such tight controls over the Democrats in the House, she is not even calling them back until tomorrow to vote on a bill on Friday. But this has been totally crafted by her team in the Speaker of the House office.
Senator Blackburn, Tori Venable with AFP Tennessee. So here in Tennessee, we took the difficult and expensive steps needed to fund our government employee pensions, but other states like Illinois and Kentucky have not. Won't this bailout be inherently unfair to Tennesseans?
Oh, of course it would be inherently unfair. Tori, when you look at Pelosi's bill, she has $500 billion to go to state governments and another $375 billion to go to local governments. Now, if you look at what she said when she announced her bill, she said, we have to expand testing. Everybody needs testing. She has $175 billion in her bill for testing. So less than 1% of her bill is going to go to testing, but she's out there saying that's what she wants. Her bill is a liberal wish list. And one of the things there is dealing with these pensions. Now, in Tennessee, you're exactly right. We have done a great job. We are in the top 3 regularly every year when it comes to being a solvent state. We are in the top 3 when it comes to being a great state for business. When you look at the 3 worst states when it comes to insolvency, you've got states like Illinois, Kentucky, New Jersey, New York that are always going to be the least solvent states. So what these states are doing that are continuing the lockdowns, some of these big blue states with these large urban centers, what they are doing is trying to push the federal government to bail them out. Now, for all of you AFPers that are on the call and you're going to be out here kind of talking to people about what is and is not in these different pieces of legislation, let me just highlight with you that what we have already sent to the states, we've put $350 billion into the SBA program and then put another $500 billion in that. The states each got a share of the $50 billion that the president put forward through his national disaster declaration. That is money that is out the door to them. The very first bill that we passed, the Phase 1 legislation, was $3 billion for vaccines and therapeutic development and procurement of PPE. There was $2.2 billion for preparedness and response efforts. There was $950 million for state and local health departments. There was $1 billion for medical supplies and medical surge capacity. There was $1.25 billion for international efforts to stop the virus. The Phase 2 bill covered free coronavirus testing for all Americans. In the CARES Act, where you had the SBA money, there was also $260 billion out the door for unemployment insurance. There was $90 billion for education. There was a plus up for Medicare payments that go to our hospitals. There has been additional money that was set forward to these states. Now, let me ask you a question. How much money did the states bring in the fourth quarter of 2019? All 50 states together. What was their collective tax revenue? $294 billion. So look at it like this. When you add all those numbers together that I have given you, and then you pose that against the $294 billion they brought in tax revenue, we have already far surpassed an entire quarter of those revenues. This is why we need to pause, be sure the CARES Act was properly implemented, and not move to a liberal leftist wish list like Nancy Pelosi has rolled out that would cost another $3 trillion.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are on an Americans for Prosperity Tele-town hall. You were just hearing from Senator Marsha Blackburn from the great state of Tennessee. We're discussing this Pelosi bailout, $3 trillion, as Senator Blackburn was just detailing, and our need to oppose this. If you want to ask a question, just press *3. We'll get you to our operators. Very briefly, we want to ask you to do something very important. We have done a petition to Congress asking them to vote no on this Pelosi bailout. It's easy for you to make your voice heard now. To your 2 senators and to your House member, just press 1 on your phone. There's no charge at all. It's free. Just press 1 on your phone if you are willing to make your voice heard saying no bailout, reject the bailouts. It'll go to your 2 senators and your House member. It's an important step. It's easy, just pressing 1. I would urge you to do that now if you would. We've got thousands upon thousands of activists with Americans for Prosperity joining us on this call right now from across the country. Let's make your voice heard now so that, as Senator Blackburn was saying, when the House comes back in, they'll hear loud and clear from you. Senator Blackburn, you just made a great point. You made a point that Congress, in the CARES Act and in earlier provisions, has already provided crucial funding for those first responders, police and EMS and firefighters, and for the hospitals and doctors and nurses, those brave, they're heroes is what they are, on the front lines, in the hospitals, dealing with these infections and this virus. So Senator, when we hear a governor like Governor Newsom of California or a mayor like Bill de Blasio of New York City, when we hear them say that if they don't get this bailout, they don't have the money to pay these first responders, that's not an accurate statement, right? I mean, you guys have already provided that support. Is that a safe thing to say?
That is a safe thing to say. And here is what is so important about that. Like I said, the Phase 1 bill that was the $8.3 billion, that all went to the states. That was followed by the President's National Disaster Declaration. That was another $50 billion. That was all to the states. The Phase 2 bill covered all the free coronavirus testing. That was all paid for by the federal government. We'll find out what that price tag is going to be. The CARES Act is the $2.2 trillion. That's where you have all of your unemployment insurance. It is where you had the $100 billion to support our nation's hospitals and healthcare system. You also had the extra plus up in Medicare payments. You also had telehealth for rural health care and a reimbursement, like an office visit reimbursement for physicians that were handling appointments by telehealth. Now, all of that is in there. That is a $2.2 trillion bill. And Tim, here is one thing that many times the states don't want to talk about. Through the Fed, Treasury Secretary Mnuchin has set up a $500 billion facility through the Fed that states can go in and they can borrow money if they are short. They can borrow money to make ends meet, and then they're going to need to pay that money back. But let me tell you something right now. Tennessee, as Tori was saying, we are such a well-managed state. We are like many states that we have a balanced budget amendment. And we manage our books. We do not carry debt. It is not fair to ask hardworking taxpayers in Tennessee to go in and pay for a bailout for a state like California or Illinois or Kentucky or New York that has chosen to run up debt and not manage their books. And it's not fair to ask those states that have those balanced budget amendments and do not carry debt to bail out these big states who for decades have mismanaged and have overspent and have run up these great big pensions. So the money is in the system. There is a way, if they are short, they can borrow money, but we are not going to give them the money. That is why Pelosi's bill is dead on arrival when it gets to the Senate.
Ladies and gentlemen, many thousands of you are joining us from across the country. I'm watching the numbers go up as Senator Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee was just speaking. Thank you for joining us. I'm Tim Phillips with Americans for Prosperity. If you will make your voice heard on the very issue that Senator Blackburn was just talking about, just press 1. It's no charge to you. It'll send your voice saying vote no, reject this Pelosi bailout to your 2 senators and House member. Just press 1. There's zero charge for that. I hope you will. We're going to go to the phones now for a few questions. James, our operator, would you go ahead and go to the phones and open up the line of the first individual caller?
Certainly, Tim. We're going to go ahead and start with Misty from Raleigh, North Carolina. Misty, your line is open.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. So I have a question. I want to know, does it really matter when activists like us email and call senators on issues like this bailout, and what difference does it really make?
Oh, my goodness. Yes, it matters. I have to tell you, it makes a big difference. And Misty, a great example of that, and I just had it hit my screen as a matter of fact. We have a staff member, even though we're all working remotely, or most of our team is working remotely, we have a list of the mail that comes in every day, the emails, and the phone calls, and then what the issues are that people are calling about, how they are weighing in. But we get that every day, and I look at it every single day. As you can well imagine, a lot of the calls that have come in today have to do with people wanting us to push back on China, push back on the Pelosi budget, and find out exactly what happened with General Flynn and this Russia investigation and the unmasking. Those are primarily the calls today, but we look at them every single day, so it makes a really big difference. And I will tell you, when I was in the state Senate in Tennessee and led the fight against the state income tax in the state, the fact that we had activists, grassroots activists, that were showing up and helping me fight that 4-year fight, it made all the difference in the world. It changed our state for the better.
Thank you, James. Do we have another question in the queue for Senator Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee?
We certainly do. We have a caller from Chattanooga, Tennessee. Josh, your line is open.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Senator, for being on tonight.
Sure.
And thank you for the work you do for Tennessee. My question is pretty simple. We know that Congress should not fund bailouts for the big spending states, but what do you think it should do? Maybe something like liability protections?
Oh, that is a great question. And what we should do, and we talked about this yesterday at the White House when I was there, and we met with the President and Secretary Mnuchin and Mark Meadows, who's the Chief of Staff. A few things. Number one, flexibility on the money that is already in the pipeline. Allow it to be used for expansion of high-speed internet, for the states to work through their unemployment insurance delivery systems, which we found out are archaic and need to be updated. For technology for schools and colleges, all of those are appropriate uses because we've needed that infrastructure during COVID-19. As we look at the restart, you're exactly right, spot on. Liability protection is the number one thing small businesses in Tennessee talk to me about needing. And I've been encouraging Leader McConnell that we need to put that bill on the floor as a standalone bill. And if the Democrats want to vote against small business, let them vote against small business. But we need to pass that. That is something that we need to get to the president's desk. The second thing I hear from small businesses is access to capital. The 7A loan program, getting our banks back up and going, looking at a payroll tax holiday, trying to craft a vehicle where you have a cap gains tax holiday, maybe for money that is invested in a small business to help restart that business between now and the end of this fiscal year, and then for giving those cap gains when those cap gains are realized on that investment. Those are the kind of things that I'm hearing from Tennessee business owners. And guess what? They are not going to cost the federal government money. They are a way for this restart to pay for itself by generating money back to the Treasury.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're on the line, a telephone town hall with Americans for Prosperity. I'm Tim Phillips. You were just hearing from Senator Marsha Blackburn. If you want to make your voice heard right now, you can press 1 on your phone, press 1 toll-free, and that'll make your voice heard with a petition to your 2 senators and to your House member saying reject the Pelosi bailouts. It's such an important thing. You just heard Senator Blackburn talking about how it matters when you take a moment to let your representatives know what you're thinking. James, let's go back to the lines.
Certainly, Tim. Our next question is going to come from Darrell from Orlando, Florida. Darrell, your line is open.
Thank you. And Senator, thank you for your time. As a Floridian, we're somewhat aware, with hurricanes, we get some help from FEMA from time to time, and we appreciate that. But after they fix your house, what they don't do is pay off your mortgage, fully fund your retirement plan, and pay your college tuition for your kids.
Right. Yeah.
What can we as Floridians do to help but not get taken on a proverbial snipe hunt?
Well, I appreciate that. And, what you can do to help is help spread the word. And I like to tell people that the most important news network is the YOU. It is you reaching out to people that are your contacts, that are within your sphere of influence. And I would encourage you to be reaching out and to getting people to the point that they realize you can't just keep printing money. When you've got this debt, there is going to be interest that is going to come due, and it is going to be vitally important for you to be able to meet those interest payments. So keep spreading the word. Share good information. You'll find my website, blackburn.senate.gov. You'll find me on social media, whether it is Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, or just share that information so that people are reading something other than what they're hearing from the mainstream media. Help them to become educated.
I can tell you, this is Tim Phillips with Americans for Prosperity, folks on the line. I follow Senator Blackburn on Twitter, and it's wonderful, great information. Senator, it's clearly you. You don't have some staffer doing it. It's you. I know your voice. I can hear how you look at things, and it's very helpful. James, another question, if you would, from the queue.
Certainly. We're now going to go to Cumberland, Pennsylvania, and Zig from Cumberland, Pennsylvania. Your line is open.
Thank you, James and Senator Blackburn, for addressing my question and really serving the nation. I just wanted to know, if we spend another $3 trillion in this Pelosi bailout, want to blow up the federal deficit? I mean, at some point, our nation will go bankrupt if we don't get control of our spending, right?
Well, you're exactly right. You have to say, when is the tipping point? And if you were to have another adverse event, what is that going to do? And look at the history of debt. And I would encourage all of you, and AFP's got some great information on this. If you go in and you look at our nation's debt from the time George Washington to George Bush was president, and the day that Barack Obama took office, I think we were at about $10.6 trillion in debt. That was too much for me, as a fiscal conservative, but that takes you all the way from George Washington through George Bush. Then during the Obama years, you look at where we got to, and by the time he left office, we were at about $20 trillion in debt. Now, that included what was spent in Iraq and Afghanistan and the wars. And then, of course, you look at what has happened now as the federal government turned to businesses and said, we need to ask you to close your doors because of this virus that is coming out of China. And businesses did that. And the money we've spent was to cushion that drawdown of the U.S. economy, to rescue it so that we have more of a V-shaped economy and we don't end up with a depression, an L-shaped economy, or a U-shaped, which is what we had during the 2008 financial crisis. So we need to be sure that we are careful about what we spend, and then after we get through this and the 2020 elections, our priority should be to reshape the federal government, to use technology, and to shrink the number of federal employees, to change how we do business so that we are being good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. And bear in mind, the federal government does not have a dime to spend or a dime to leverage until the U.S. taxpayer, hardworking taxpayers, send that money to Washington, D.C.
That's absolutely right, Senator Blackburn. You know, it just really grinds my gears that this bailout would be rewarding big spending states and reckless spending in the states of California, Illinois, and New York, and punish states like ours that have been fiscally responsible. You know, I know people can go online right now and they can take action at www.rejectbailouts.com. They can contact your office. What other actions do you think that they should take? And do you have any other final notes of what we should be doing right now to stop this Pelosi pork bailout?
Well, I think the education concept and making people aware that this bill completely ignores what it claims to do. It does not do a lot for testing. Like I said, you've got less than 1% of the bill that will be spent on testing. And right now, they're looking at a bill that contains all sorts of pet projects and line items that have absolutely nothing to do with COVID-19 or getting our economy back on its firm footing. And this is something, I'm a member of the Senate's Budget Working Group, and I sponsor the Balanced Budget Amendment. And these are things that we need to push for and build awareness for and have the American people join in pushing for these, because it would help us to keep the federal government in check. Our state in Tennessee has a balanced budget amendment. Other states have this. It is why you do not see a lot of states carrying lots of debt. So those would be helpful. Let me say this as I get ready to go on and do a Fox Business interview. Thank you all for letting me be with you. I have loved it. Really appreciate the work that you do, the awareness that you bring to issues. I hope that everybody stays safe and stays well, and hope that you all will use this time to build your networks and to make certain that people are aware that speaking up, everybody can help to make a difference. And you remember the Samuel Adams quote, "It doesn't take a majority, but rather an irate, tireless minority to build those sparks of hope and a bonfire in the minds of people that will join you in pushing for freedom. So keep at it. Tim, Tori, thanks. Enjoyed being with you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Senator
Senator.
Marsha Blackburn. Well said. Well said. I tell you what, James, we have a couple more minutes. Tori, you okay to take a couple of questions, maybe if there are any left in the queue before we wrap up tonight?
Sure, let's
Certainly, yeah.
Let's do that for a couple minutes. Let's do that. Also, many of you are listening, thousands of you. Just press 1 if you're willing to make your voice heard with this poll. Not really even a poll, it's a petition. Pressing 1, toll free to you, will send a message from you saying reject the Pelosi bailout to your 2 senators and to your House member. You heard Senator Blackburn talk about how important it is, how they every day look at the number of folks calling, emailing, texting them. So please do that now. Press 1, it's toll free. And James, there's a couple of folks left in the queue. Tori and I will try to stand in for the senator before we wrap up tonight.
Certainly. Let's go ahead and start off with Betty. Betty Bolton here in Tennessee. If we can go ahead and unmute your line. Go ahead and ask your question, Betty.
Thank you. I'm concerned if the money goes to these states, they've mismanaged money already, and that's why they're in the position that they're in. So what's the guarantee is they are not going to continue to squander that money and not accomplish what they're supposed to accomplish?
Betty, you just nailed it. New York, California. I'll give you one example. We heard a fellow on, I forget his name, from Florida, Jarrell, I think it was. Florida has 2 million more citizens than the state of New York. Yet New York every year spends more than double what Florida spends. So if this bailout passes from Nancy Pelosi, you're going to have states that are fiscally well managed, bailing out big spending states. And Tori, I know Tennessee is well managed, right?
We absolutely are. You know, I would hate to see this happen. It's really a perverse incentive. Actions have consequences, frankly. And if these politicians don't have to face the consequences of their bad policy making and fix their own budgets, if they can depend on the federal government to bail them out, they're never going to have an incentive to lower taxes or to live within their means.
Well said. James, another question?
Yes, I'd like to give Donna in College Grove, Tennessee, an opportunity to ask her question. Donna, if we can unmute your line.
Hi, Donna. Go right ahead.
Okay. How long will the additional $600 that's been added to the standard unemployment benefits continue? Because as it is now, there's no incentive for millions of people to go back to work if they're making more not working.
Donna, that's a great point. When the CARES Act was being debated, Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina and Senator Pat Toomey from Pennsylvania pointed out that problem that you just laid out, that unemployment benefits under this plan would be higher than some folks receive from their jobs. So it would be a disincentive for some folks to go back into the workforce. It would be better for them economically to stay on unemployment. They attempted to fix it. They were not able to do so. It was an emergency situation when the CARES Act was going through. I know that Mitch McConnell, the leader in the majority leader in the U.S. Senate, has his eye on that problem, and they're trying to do a fix with the next legislative vehicle. It remains to be seen, though, frankly, if they're going to be able to do that. But you nailed one of the key problems. There was a lot of good in the CARES Act, for sure, but that was one of the problems. Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina tried to get it fixed, could not do it in the rush to get the CARES Act done. But McConnell knows about it. They're hoping to fix it, but we don't have any assurances that that's going to happen at this point. James, how about one more question, and then Tori will have the last word to wrap us up tonight. James, go ahead with the next question for someone in the queue.
All right. Well, then our last question from our listeners will be coming from Chris Scarborough in Jackson, Tennessee. We can unmute your line, Chris.
Yes, I'd like to know, some people have said something about putting pressure on China, but will that not in turn put pressure on us? Because does not China own trillions of dollars in our bonds right now?
Now, Chris, it is one of the great problems and great dangers with having so much debt. You know, we're at 27 trillion now in debt after the CARES Act and the other spending of the last few weeks. 27 trillion. That's a number that's almost impossible to get our arms around. And it's going to go higher. I think it'll end up being closer to 30 by the end of this calendar year. And that money is owed in many cases, and we need foreign creditors to buy a lot of the debt that we're putting out there right now, these bonds, these treasuries. So it is a significant problem. It's why the great failure of the last 15 to 18 years in our nation, both parties, frankly, has been to get control of federal spending. It's the greatest failure of the last decade and a half or so. So we've got big challenges ahead of us. I hope and urge you on the line to stay in this fight. Tori Venable, State Director of Tennessee Americans for Prosperity, you get the last word tonight. Go right ahead.
Thanks so much, Tim. And thank you all so much for joining us tonight. You know, make sure that you're getting your voice heard. Go to rejectbailouts.com. Make sure you sign the petition to email your state, your representatives and senators. Call your senators, call your representatives, utilize that hashtag rejectbailouts on social media, and help us really drive the narrative to say no to Pelosi's pork-filled bailout boondoggle. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Good night, everyone.